Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bianca Durrani, President and CEO of Aperio Philanthropy, co-host of today's event with New York University School of Professional Studies. We're delighted to welcome you to today's conversation. Just a little bit of background, Aperio is a nonprofit consulting firm with a vision for a world in which everyone can thrive. We exist to unleash the power of communities to drive change by dramatically expanding resources for nonprofits. Day to day, we work alongside community leaders and fundraisers across the country to develop simpler, faster, and smarter ways to generate revenue for their missions. Our client services provide strategic advisory and hands-on support and embedded fundraisers to support that work. As a firm created to drive change, we are thrilled to be hosting this webinar series with NYU. For the past few years, we've been facilitating conversations among thought leaders about the role of philanthropy and fundraising in change, and specifically in solving complex societal challenges. Today's topic is, of course, one that is top of mind for all of us, the upcoming election and how it might impact our fundraising. We're going to talk about what we can do as fundraisers to get in front of some of the challenges and opportunities in this year-end fundraising season. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce our co-host, Michelle D'Amico.
Thank you, Bianca. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle D'Amico, and I'm the Director of Continuing Education and Public Programs at the NYU SPS Center for Global Affairs, or CGA. Since our founding, our goal at the CGA has been to prepare global citizens to make a positive change in the world. We do this through a variety of activities, including our 2 graduate programs, one in global affairs, and another MS in global security, conflict, and cybercrime. We also offer a wide variety of skills and knowledge-based continuing education courses and offer public events such as this that expand upon the topics we cover in our classrooms. We are very proud to be home to the George H. Heyman Jr. Program for Fundraising and Philanthropy. Through our open enrollment courses, on-site intensives, and certificate in fundraising, we offer professionally oriented educational opportunities for those looking to enter or grow within the fundraising field. Courses are taught by practitioner faculty who bring their vast experience, expertise, and networks to the classroom. We'll send out additional information about our programs following today's conversation, so please feel free to reach out with any questions. Now I'm delighted to introduce today's moderator, who is an alumna of our graduate program and co-chair of our advisory board. Channon Lucas is the Chief Administrative Officer for the Mother Cabrini Health Foundation, where she oversees the day-to-day administrative, governance, and operational functions of the foundation, as well as the external relations communications, community relations, and public policy teams. Without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Channon for today's discussion.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Bianca, for such a warm welcome. And what a great time to be having this conversation of all the moments in the world of politics. Elections really impact all of us, and that includes our fundraising programs. Some of our donors might shift resources to the campaigns, while others might lean more into an interest area or a passion of their own. As fundraisers, we face more noise in telling our stories and sparking conversations. And I don't know about you all, but my news feed, my social media feeds, my water cooler conversations are dominated by these topics. And as fundraisers, we have an opportunity in this moment to really spotlight the relevancy of our mission and develop meaningful partnerships with donors. And so our conversation today will convene a panel of experienced leaders to discuss how to approach fundraising in this complex election season. We're going to talk about what we can learn from past election seasons, how the upcoming election could impact year-end giving, and what strategies and tactics fundraising teams can use to elevate their work in a noisy environment. But most of all, we want to be able to give you advice on what every organization should be doing right now to prepare. And so it's my pleasure to get this conversation started with our distinguished panel. First, let me introduce Jennifer Goforth. Jennifer is the Senior Director of Individual Giving at Third Way. She has worked in philanthropy and external affairs for more than 25 years at a variety of nonprofits, including Johns Hopkins Medicine, the Brookings Institution, the Seattle Symphony, and the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Welcome, Jennifer. We also have Shabana Gubi. and Shabana is the Chief Philanthropy Officer of Second Harvest of Silicon Valley. Shabana joined Second Harvest as Director of Major Gifts in 2015. After leading impressive growth in Major Gifts revenue, she was promoted to Director of Leadership Gifts. She is credited with building a strong team of fundraisers, leveraging data analytics for insights to inform new fundraising strategies, and prioritizing and building deep relationships with donors. Marissa Todd is the Deputy Director of the Midwest Innocence Project. In her role, she leads development, marketing, and finance operations to ensure MIP has the resources it needs to investigate, litigate, and exonerate wrongfully convicted people in the 5-state region of Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska. And finally, we have Anna Zavisha. Anna is the Vice President of Development at Conservation Lands Foundation. She has been working in environmental conservation and stewardship since 2008, driving public engagement in outdoor volunteerism and leading multi-sector sustainability initiatives across Colorado. And I just want to say a big welcome to all of our panelists. I can see you're all here and excited to get started. And maybe just to kind of jump this conversation off, it might be helpful to have each of you share a little bit about your lens on the conversation we'll be having today. I might start with Anna, but let us know from your perspective, how do elections impact fundraising?
Thanks, Shannon. Happy to be here. So from our perspective, the work at the Conservation Lands Foundation is pretty partisan, at least in recent years. And so, looking at the last two elections, 2016 and 2020 presidential elections, we really saw kind of heightened donors' fears about potential threats to environmental causes, specifically some attacks on public lands. And fear can be a very powerful motivator. So that was a little bit of a bump for us, a bump that we affectionately called in 2016 the Trump bump. And then, for this election, what we're really hearing is a substantial shift in donor priorities. And, in the introduction, Shannon kind of alluded to this, but donors specifically telling us that they are so concerned about the outcome of this election that they're shifting their support to campaigns and candidates. And finally, I think the other piece is just donor fatigue. I can tell you from personal experience, having made a very small contribution to a campaign, I was then bombarded with 3 to 4 emails daily and about 3 to 4 texts daily, starting every day after the day I made my donation. So that kind of bombardment really, I think, hurts everybody in the professional fundraising field.
Definitely, and I know exactly what you mean. I got those texts as well and had to unsubscribe a few times. But I might ask Shabana, could you share your thoughts on the same discussion? How do elections impact your fundraising?
Yeah, excited to be here. And first of all, I want to acknowledge that the work we all do is hard work. It's especially hard during noisy periods like the one we are having. And unlike Anna's organization, I work for the food bank in Silicon Valley, and it is pretty nonpartisan. And we have donors of all political stripes donating to our cause. So it's a little bit different. I view election times as an opportunity for my team to critically look at everything we do and hone our craft. This is an opportunity for us to do better because it just gives us that increased awareness of how do we cut through this noise. And so it's like we are engaging in a lot of conversations and new strategies, which makes us take our work to the next level.
Thanks, Shabana. Marissa, any insights from you as you think about elections and fundraising?
Yeah, so I'm also very excited to be here. I love fundraising. I love talking about how current events can impact those things. And as Shabana just said, the noise this election year is definitely loud. And so that's some of the things that we're keeping in mind. We do Some people feel very politically charged about the work of wrongful convictions. So we understand the climate that we're in, the 5 states we operate in. We have to be mindful of some of that. We do have donors across the political spectrum. Like Anna mentioned, we have been told by some donors that they are diverting funds to candidates and causes as they try to help make the change they want to see in the world. So just considering all of those things as we think about how we're going to be successful and meet our, fundraising goals so that we can keep moving our mission forward.
Thanks, Marissa. And Jennifer, how about you? Any thoughts on elections and fundraising as an opening discussion?
Sure. So it's not too different from what others have said. I think, there's a polarity when you think about the effect of elections on fundraising. On the one hand, there's a distraction that can happen from your organization's cause as donors are giving hard money to candidates and campaigns. On the other hand, you can have donors become more focused on your issue. Especially if it's something that is being raised as a policy issue in the election or talked about in the press more because of the election cycle. It's an opportunity to actually increase awareness of your cause. So I think it can go both ways, and it's just a matter of navigating what exactly is going on.
I like that. And I should note too, Jennifer, we noticed before we joined, Jennifer's having a little bit of bandwidth issues.
Yeah.
We just want to acknowledge that, but we can still hear you beautifully. So
Okay.
I might follow up with you on that though, given that you've fundraised through previous election cycles. Give us a sense of, are there some lessons that you've taken away or biggest lessons from past elections?
Well, let's see. I mean, I would say, I think that the biggest, probably the biggest takeaway is something that actually my grandmother used to say to me, which is, "This too shall pass." So, as crazy and chaotic and, or, difficult to get your message across and hard as things may seem during a particularly intense election cycle, I would say that, before the last election, I would say we have a definite end date. Maybe we don't have a definite end date as much as we used to, but we know that, sometime toward the end of this year, things will quiet down and there will be talk of, what comes next. So I think that's something that is just important, I think, to remember generally, but especially during a time like this. Also, I would say that unless you're working on an issue that is specifically being addressed in the election, or that's a high level policy priority for someone who is running, not much probably changes for your organization. So, hopefully, as things quiet down and even out, business as usual will go on. So I don't think there's not typically a shift in what matters to your donors. Some may feel a little more urgent about certain issues given the outcome of the election, but in general, not that much changes. So, I guess I would say, don't worry too much.
I like that. And I really like your grandmother's "this too shall pass." It kind of ties a little bit into what Shabana talked about earlier, how we prioritize what we do in this moment, and deepening that relationship or honing our craft, right? Instead of worrying about what's going on outside, maybe we can lean a little bit more into the things that we do and that we're strong at. Shabana, speaking of, this election, though, is a little unusual. I think it's a little louder than some of the elections have been in the past. We just are sitting here during debate week, and it's been nonstop on the news cycle of just noise. What do you see as the implications for fundraising and how navigating this particular election might differ from past years?
Yeah, like as you might imagine, we have fundraised successfully through many past election cycles, and so this year, this election cycle does feel especially noisy. At the same time, we have a lot to learn from the election fundraising themselves. So I think if you had asked me earlier in the summer, it felt the mood was different. As we all read, the vibe was different. I think now people are more engaged, and I'm heartened by that. When people are more engaged, they are more engaged in everything. There are a lot of emails, but I think in a way people are paying more attention than they did earlier in the summer. And in terms of something concrete to do, I would say this is not the year to rinse and repeat what worked for you before. This is the year, like I said, to look at everything you're doing. And if you have the data, segment your donor database and talk. One of the things that the political campaigns are doing so effectively is they talk to their donor segments in a way that speaks to the donors. We can learn from that. So if you're able to talk to the different segments in the way that speaks to that segment of donors. And similarly, I would say in terms of this worry, like a couple of years ago, there was the number a couple of years ago, there was about $250 billion. I don't know what the current number is in donor advice funds. The funds are there. There are resources. There is a lot of money out there. Our job is to inspire that. And the political campaigns are doing that so effectively, so we can learn from that. We have to make that a priority. We need to inspire and energize people to kind of like make that choice to make that donation to our cause. And there's different ways we can do that. And yeah, so there's a lot of things we can do. And so this is the time to get with your teams, to get with your colleagues and brainstorm and think about what is working. And the other thing that the political campaigns are doing so effectively is they are scaling their fundraising activities through the use of surrogates. And in our own way, we can do that too. We have board members, we have our inner circle of supporters, and maybe we can deploy them in ways we haven't before.
Surrogates are an amazing way to think about utilizing the people who are part of your team, part of your board, in your circle. And it's also a good way to think about the conversation continuing past the election, right? The election is a moment, but the work continues. And so we've got all of this noise happening. Those surrogates can help sustain the conversation, throughout the remainder of the year and into next year. And as we sit here, it's September. So I think we're all thinking right now, year-end fundraising, what's our plan? What's our strategy? And I want to turn to Marissa for a second and just ask, very practically thinking, how are you all preparing for year-end? Do you have any strategies in place? What's going on for you right now?
Yeah, so excellent thing to discuss, given that it is almost mid-September. So we start talking about year-end back in like June. Generally, we try to start thinking about that because we run calendar year anyway, but given that it is an election year, we have been very cognizant that there would be a lot of noise. I agree with what Shobana said, like the vibe has definitely changed in terms of how it seems people are feeling and how they're engaging. And so that has not really impacted what we were thinking originally, but is making us feel better about the course we had already decided on. The work we do is very heavy. We are dealing with people's lives that have been, taken away from them. It impacts communities. It impacts the people who are, victims of crimes. So we know the subject matter is already a little intense. And this year we were very much focusing our message on being one of hope and inspiration and trying to counteract some of the negativity that we see in the political landscape, especially again, in our geography. We are very conservative in some of our states. We have very tough judicial systems in our states. And so trying to show that even though it is hard and the work is heavy, like there is hope, there is light, being that beacon of positivity is something that we are carrying into our themes. And then also just, as Shabana also mentioned, like tailoring our messaging, like getting in front of donors, having very personalized communications with those folks that, you know, we already know well, acknowledging that like this is the climate we're in, and still talking about how important the mission is and how much we still need support to do the work that we're doing. We've had a lot of cases moving, especially in Missouri this year. So we've had a lot of opportunity to be in front of people talking about the work and why it's important. And then again, I just think it's important to acknowledge like the state of the world. If we pretend that we exist in a vacuum, that doesn't help donors feel like we're being realistic about things. So
And authentic in your connection with them, right? So
yes.
as you're having these major gift solicitations, you really want to understand where they're coming from. Anna, same question for you. As you think about year end, anything top of mind or anything that you'd like to reflect on?
Yeah, I know, you know, one of the things that we're really looking at is scenario planning because of the fact that our work in 2025 will look very different depending on the outcome of the election, not just the White House, but Congress overall. And so being clear in kind of what is going to happen. And, you know, for us, our work really does get impacted severely by the administration. So, you know, for example, former President Trump shrunk 2 national monuments using the Antiquities Act. That was unprecedented. The Antiquities Act had never been used that way in the past. And so it's very real consequences for us and our donor community. That being said, you know, regardless of kind of the outcome of the election, we do want to really accomplish 3 things with our year end. One is to highlight our long track record of success, regardless of the administration. And sometimes that is giving examples of kind of being on offense, and other times it's being on defense, right? But there's successes with both. Building a sense of community and hope and excitement, hopefully, about what lies ahead and what is possible. And then rallying around conservation as a long-standing American value to help unite the country. Because I do think that post-election, this will be an important message. We have had the Antiquities Act used 18 times in history, 9 Republicans and 9 Democrats. This is not a controversial, or should not be a controversial thing for us to do. So that's kind of strategy. Tactical, I think the biggest thing for us is just having a really good plan. You know, that whole saying about, you know, make your plan and then work it, right? So for us, it's being very clear in our goals and objectives, and then having, you know, dates, important dates that are milestones when we know communications are going to hit, looking across our channels so that we're leveraging every single communication channel available to us, not just our own channels, but partners channels. You know, if we have strong partners that can amplify our message, who have told us that they're willing to do this at year end, this is the time to ask, right? This is our Super Bowl. Like, we need to make sure that we are getting to December 31st and meeting our goals. And so I would just say, you know, work it from strategy down to implementation, put it down on paper, and make sure that you have a team that will implement it. Another thing we like to say around CLF is teamwork makes the dream work. So I know that sounds a little corny, but it takes all of us to make it happen.
Does not sound corny to me at all. And strategic plans are my love language. So one thing you all have really sort of hit on that I think is interesting is thinking about the themes that drive through your messaging. And I love what you said, Anna, about using multiple channels, not just your own, using channels of surrogates and partners. But one thing that is still hard to do in some of that noise is really tell your story. And I'd love, Shabana, talk to us a little bit. And I like how you talked about data and segments, but give us some advice on how to use storytelling to cut through some of that election noise.
Yeah, thanks, Channon. So we do a lot of storytelling about our neighbors who are accessing food assistance, and a lot of them are stories of hope. So a lot of it is stories of, so we do a variety of stories of neighbors from different backgrounds, different different cultural backgrounds and different life situations, different life stages, to just show the diversity of neighbors needing our help, to make that relatable for donors, because they may have, and a lot of what we encounter when we talk about food insecurity is people have these myths about what the face of hunger looks like, right? So a lot of the storytelling is about educating people and to bust the myths that people may have, because the face of hunger may not look like what people think. And you cannot correct people's perceptions or impressions by just giving them facts. You have to do it through storytelling. You have to move them to get them to understand, oh yeah, actually there are college students facing hunger. Because when you talk about, for example, college students facing hunger, a lot of people say, oh yeah, of course, I ate ramen when I was in college. But college student hunger is not that. And so by highlighting the stories of some students in our local colleges, like stories of real students, and taking a deep dive, people then get it. People get it. Oh my God, college is so much more expensive than when I went to college. Housing is so much more expensive. Oh my God, there are students actually living in their cars. So they need to see that level of detail to kind of process and understand that maybe the way they were thinking about it is not how it is today.
Absolutely. And practically and tactically speaking, are you telling those stories through short form video? Are you guys doing, Instagram? What are the platforms and how you tell those stories?
All of the above. We do short videos, all of the above. We even have TikTok. We have different, we sometimes use pictures and quotes. And sometimes we also are lucky enough, sometimes, especially during the holidays, to get earned media. So those are also great opportunities.
That's amazing. I asked that question because just a quick memory. I remember many years ago, I worked for the Archdiocese of New York, and we were raising money for some of the retired sisters. And we featured one nun in a little short video, and people called for years after to find out how Sister Mary Claire was doing. Is she still with us? So people really hear and connect sometimes with those stories. And then as much as we can all do, I think is a really great benefit when it comes to storytelling. Jennifer, shifting to you a little bit, thinking about organizations whose missions are actually related to politics, how do you seize this moment of relevancy, especially without getting caught up in some of the partisan fray and polarization that goes on in those topics?
Yeah, so it may be a little bit different from my organization. Because we are a political organization, we have a partisan perspective, and we're very open about that we're a center-left think tank and advocacy policy institute. So we are in the fray, whether we like it or not, we're in the fray, and we do like it, I guess I should say, some more than others, but we do. And in former roles that I've had, there were either donors all across the political spectrum, or the organization itself, part of its identity was that it was nonpartisan and did not take partisan positions. So while we don't need to be above the fray, or outside of the fray, we do try to elevate the conversation so that we're talking about relevant policy issues and steering clear of the kind of down and dirty personal attacks and the mudslinging that's such a feature of our elections nowadays. So, and especially, in the last couple of cycles. So, I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword, as I mentioned before. Right now, donors are distracted by the election, but they're also, at least in our case, keenly interested in well-informed opinions and also prognostications. I mean, we're asked by our donors all the time what we think is going to happen. And, we want to give, informed answers that are backed up by some data. So what we're really trying to do here is to meet our donors where they are. We have some who they don't want to discuss anything until after the election. They're just hyper focused on it. We have some that, want to talk about the election with us all the time, because so much is on the line. And then we want to be readily available for those people who really want to talk through what's going on and get, what they consider to be an insider's perspective. For a center-left organization, this was a very tough summer. There was a ton of angst, and that's true across our donor pool as well. People were really, deeply upset and worried. And so I think that, good stewardship is just, as it always is key. So checking in without being overbearing, and where there are openings, discussing what we can still do to try to fulfill our mission during this kind of turbulent season. One other thing I would say is that, my organization is spending a lot of time on scenario planning for whether, for both outcomes of the election, which is, lots of fun on the one hand and a total bummer on the other, but also very, very important to do. And I think gives not only donors, but also staff a sense that, a sense of some peace and control and calm that, we do have a plan either way. And, the Republic will continue, hopefully. So that's, I think that that's how we're trying to seize the moment, as well as we can. And it isn't a one size fits all play.
No, and I think that's a really great way to think about it. And I think let's put a punctuation mark at the end. The Republic will continue! ! But your conversation about scenarios reminds me of prior to us jumping on today, having a chat with Anna where we talked about scenarios again and thinking a little bit about, I like Jennifer, you said either outcome, but Anna, in our earlier chat, I like that you said there may be no outcome. We may not know. Would love to jump in and talk to you a little bit more about preparing for multiple scenarios and what are you thinking about 2025 fundraising in light of multiple options of which way this could go?
Yeah, we did have that chat, and that is, I think, something that certainly can happen is that on election day, November 5th, we will not know. We may not know the week after, but I think by January, early January, we really should know. So in scenario planning, I had mentioned, we're doing kind of 3 versions of an appeal letter to be ready on November 6th to get it to the printer and kind of, put it in mailboxes with the most timely information. But as far as 2025, I think there's some things to really be paying attention to as fundraisers. One is, no matter what, about half the country is going to be very upset with the election outcome. So that's an important thing for all of us to keep in mind, is that people are going to be hurting, they're going to be angry. Second, what's happening in the economy, I think, is a huge driver of where people feel confidence. The stock market's been a little shaky of late. What's that going to look like? How does the election outcome affect the economy? It's always top of mind for fundraisers. But, for us, really, at Conservation Lands Foundation and other more highly partisan groups, there is that whole like fear-based, which I mentioned at the beginning, piece, right? And it's so, how do you frame your messaging? I don't think fear-based messaging is super effective over the long term, but it's very effective in the short term. And I think a good example, maybe for people to understand what I'm talking about, is yesterday was September 11th. And many of us on social media see "never forget." To me, that's negative framing versus always remember, which is positive framing, right? So how you frame your message post-election based on where your organization lands in the political spectrum and what's going to motivate your donors, I think is an important piece for all of us to pay attention to. And then, keeping in mind that people are going to want to protect their values through their investment. So if they value climate change mitigation, they're going to probably put more money towards Conservation Lands Foundation if there's a Republican administration versus a Democratic administration. That's the way we're looking at it, and really kind of trying to take our crystal ball and understand what may happen in order to really be prepared.
I think you sound incredibly prepared, and I love the scenarios, and I feel for your printer who's got the multiple letters ready to go on deck. Want to come back to Marissa a little bit, because Marissa, I like the way earlier you said that the work you do is heavy. And sometimes I think to start conversations with folks, it can feel a little bit sensitive in the way we all think about topics and issues as black and white sometimes. But as you know, so many of all of our causes are complex. There's a lot of complexity and solutions to problems are long-term. As you think about your work and as we look ahead to both the election and 2025, how can we bring back nuance into some of these conversations?
Yeah, this is a great question. And, acknowledging that a lot of the work that we do is very complicated. There are multiple shades of gray. Even no one case that we handle for an individual client is the same. Even though there might be similar issues, there are, a handful of hallmarks of wrongful conviction, like they don't present themselves in the same way in every case. So there is an awful lot of nuance. One of the things we've been really trying to do is step up our just regular communications game in terms of educating people about some of those issues, especially when you work on a very complex issue. Even just telling a client story, we will draft something that's like multiple pages, multiple paragraphs. It's a lot of legalese. It's not easy jargon to understand if you don't have a legal background. So just trying to make it easier for people to understand the fundamental issues that are at play, and then making sure there's a mix of those kinds of communications, personalizing them when we can, not always asking, but just taking a lot of opportunities to let people know all of the various issues that are involved in wrongful conviction work. In addition to representing clients, we also do a lot of policy work. So we work with the state legislators in our 5 states to try to pass laws that either make it easier for us to correct injustice or hopefully prevent injustice on the front end of investigations or court cases. And so that work is something people don't necessarily realize we do. So we're trying to get better about telling those stories as well. And in all stories and education things that we put forward, we try to make sure that we're doing it in an ethical way. We try to make sure that we're compensating clients if we're telling their stories, if we're asking them to appear at events. We try to make sure that it's their voice. We try to promote them and lift them up and not just focus on, that negativity. I really like that Anna's focusing on how you frame things matters. And so we can be super negative about the harm that happens to people in communities because of wrongful convictions. But if we choose that tactic, that's not going to inspire people to join us and help us create positive change necessarily. So there's a time and a place for that negative message. But overall, if we want people to join us on what sometimes feels like pushing a boulder uphill, we have to be optimistic. We have to be hopeful, and we have to then help educate people and explain all the nuance so that they have a better understanding of why this work takes so long, why it's so complicated, and why their support, even from dollars to sharing social media messages to showing up at events, why all of it matters.
Thanks, Marissa. And that really, for me, resonates. We kind of jumped in, but at Mother Cabrini, we're a 6-year-old private foundation. We actually don't do any fundraising. But as you talked about telling your clients stories, we talk a lot about asset framing and how we think about people and what they're experiencing. And I remember very early on, we had a conversation with staff about people kept talking about, we serve the poor. And the discussion is, are we the poor? Is someone poor? Is that an intrinsic state of being? Or is it a moment you're experiencing in your life? And it's something that we pass through, maybe we don't, but it's not the essence of who they are. And I think that asset framing is a really, really important way of looking at all of our issues and telling stories. And I do want to just maybe open up that conversation, because I think that nuance piece is important to Anna and Shabana and Jennifer. I don't know if any of you want to jump in a little bit in that very strong polarized world of how you all are thinking about adding some nuance into conversations. And I'm not going to call on anyone in particular. I see everyone looking and thinking. So if anybody would like to jump in, let me know.
So I can jump in quickly on that. I think that it's important with donors to talk through all eventualities and to be really honest. And there are a ton of nuances usually that come up in all of our discussions. So, I mean, very, very rarely is something just completely binary, right? So I think just really honoring the sort of the ambiguity that's being felt, and the the lack of knowing, and sort of maybe the lack of being able to make concrete plans for now, which makes a lot of people really nervous. I think that's something that can actually provide some stability, and just sort of the act of talking through different nuances of what may end up happening, and talking through with your team the nuances of how you're going to handle fundraising, whether it's end of year fundraising or major gifts in this time when people are distracted, and also giving a lot of hard money. I think that those are ways to create stability and create a sense of confidence in a plan.
Jennifer, thank you for that. I see we have some questions coming in. Would love to encourage our audience to, if you haven't, to submit some questions, but I'm going to shift a little bit into some of those discussions. Our first question is, where do you see current trends? Oh, 1 second. Let me just see this here. Where do you see current trends and or priorities on the current fundraising philanthropy scene? I have seen a lot of interest in funding towards rural communities and also women's access to healthcare, women's health. Are there any other trends that you see? And I might start, Jennifer, with you on this one. And then maybe if anyone else wants to jump in, but the question is current trends on the fundraising and philanthropy scene, specifically rural communities and women's access to healthcare. Anything else popping up for you, Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that pops into my head immediately is clean energy. So we have, a huge number of our donors are interested in learning more about it and understanding it and in giving to it. And I think, from my perspective, I've only worked very tangentially in the climate and energy fundraising area. So I'm no expert in that area, but it seemed to me that it used to be that there was a population of donors that were very committed and interested in that cause, but it wasn't something that, was sort of a broad interest beyond this very committed, environmental donors pool. And I think now there are a lot of people who give to, a huge number of causes who also are interested in this and are bringing it in as part of their philanthropic portfolio. So that's something that we see more and more, that our donors to our, general operating or whatever are also interested in climate work.
Yeah, I will second that, because we're seeing that shift, right? We work to protect public lands, and typically that means we really want to limit any kind of infrastructure or, drilling, mining. And now there's a push to actually put renewable energy onto public lands. And so understanding that we need to make a clean energy transition, but also still protect wildlife, water, air. We find ourselves in a situation where we're really looking at how to do that. So I would agree with Jennifer. And then the other issue that I think is top of mind for most communities, especially in larger urban centers, is homelessness and the unhoused. And it's a huge issue right now with housing costs. And I'm, at least in the West where I'm based, that is an issue that lots of people are trying to figure out. And it's a tough issue.
And it reminds me a little bit, and I saw Shabana just jumped off of mute, of the conversation earlier of what people think of as people who are unhoused, right? That you think you know who those people are, you think you know who's hungry, but it's far more pervasive than people think about. Inflation right now, what that does for someone's income, and when it comes to paying your rent, it's such a struggle for so many families. But Shabana, let me let you get in here a little bit. I can see you.
Yeah, I just want to second what both Jennifer and Anna shared. I think here in Silicon Valley, definitely housing is a big focus on fixing our housing issue and the number of unhoused people we have. I also see a lot of focus on climate change. There's a lot of interest in investing in climate change, and also to some extent health equity is also a focus for a lot of folks.
Beautiful. We've got another question here, which is, how do you handle interactions with donor prospects who are very passionately vocal about their partisanship leanings? Is it better to avoid the conversations or express neutrality on the matter? And I think we're talking a little bit about some of maybe the major gift one-to-one solicitation moments. Any of you want to tackle that particular question?
I can jump in first and then see if anyone else wants to follow. But, for us, again, it's not a tough position to take, because the organization in and of itself and the work that we do has become so highly partisan that typically we are aligned with our donor who are voicing, or prospect. I think they were asking about donor prospects. Who are voicing strong support for, the policies that we're trying to support. So there's typically alignment. Now, in my previous work, it was a very nonpartisan organization, and I would typically just present that as the way that things work, right? So you're talking to a donor, they're pushing a partisan agenda with you in the conversation. And my response was typically, where we find ourselves in this highly polarized world is that we attract people from all sides. And it's a wonderful place to do that and give people the opportunity to get to know others who might think differently than they do. So I think it just really depends on where your organization falls in the partisan bickering.
Yeah, well, we have donors, like I shared before, of all political stripes, and sometimes we do get questions, and we get questions like, how do you check if people are eligible? Do you, give food to illegal people who are here illegally? These are questions that come up sometimes in these one-on-one conversations. And we always go back to stating what are our values, that we don't check, and why we don't check. We don't ask these questions. We want to decrease stigma. This is how we do it. And then let the donor decide. We just state where we are at, and let them decide if this is still aligned with their values. So that is important to maintain the integrity of where we are. So, state who we are, what we stand for, and not pander to whatever the donor interests are. It's very
Let
important.
them make their choice. That's a great approach. Jennifer, did you want to jump in on that?
Sure. So, I would just say we've all probably had that moment with a family member who is saying, something about a position that we just we can't even believe that this person that we love feels this way. And I think it's the same with donors to some extent, that it's a good opportunity to just practice really deep listening and trying to understand the core issues that are maybe causing fear or causing panic, or causing the person to feel a way that is coming across as extreme, whether it's on one side or the other. I think if you are needing to remain neutral and nonpartisan, which is probably, a good stance for most of us to have, at least some of the time. I think just listening and being, thanking the person for sharing their opinion and trying to learn something from what they're saying. And then, moving the conversation towards, if there's anything in the dialogue that dovetails with work that your organization does, and trying to bring it back to that and just say, well, let me tell you a little bit about this. It's not exactly what you were talking about, but this might interest you. So I think that's important. I think a lot of times if people just feel heard, especially those who feel like their voice is maybe being lost, among, a big chorus that they're not part of. I think if they feel heard, it goes a long way towards making them feel very comfortable with you, which will help you to,
I think
finish
that
the
hearing
relationship.
and that hearing and connecting back to mission is hugely important. What we do as fundraisers often is really listen for what someone's actually saying. And there might be, again, we were talking a lot about noise today, a lot of other things that come up, but what moments in that conversation really tie back to mission. Someone once said to me about politics and policy, it's a heebie-weebie problem. And that sometimes us in the nonprofit space, we are the weebie. He be gone, we be here. So rather than focus on the actual politician and I sorry for the gendered term of he, but the idea is that we are holding that space and we are holding that center because these issues are going to still be there, whether that elected official is in office or not. So it's always nice to kind of shift and pivot back as a politician of your own to what you and your organization are doing. We talked about this a little bit, but does anyone else want to share their professional opinion? Anna talked earlier about the kind of badgering emails and text messages that politicians are using. Sometimes people are turned off by this. And as you all think about your own tactics and strategies, well, elected or campaigns might be effective. Have any of you used any email text campaigns, or do you have any opinions on that tactic?
I have very strong opinions.
I thought you might. Didn't want to kick it, but go, please.
So to me, this is a short term, I don't care about the donor relationship. I just need the money, and I'm not going to touch them again until 4 years from now. So I don't have to cultivate them. I just need them to open up their wallet as many times as possible. And by badgering them, I'm going to do it.
A transaction, right?
What was that?
Transaction versus developing a relationship.
Absolutely right there. There's the problem. This is not how people want to be treated. And what most of us as professional fundraisers are really doing is building relationships with people and helping them be able to support their values, the causes they believe in, doing good work, showing impact, showing change over time. And that is not transactional. And so I would steer highly away from that. Unless you're running a campaign, in which case, a political campaign, in which case it might be the best tactic out there.
Excellent. Thank you, Anna. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in on that. We've got a couple more questions, about 5 minutes left in our time. Let me see. In light of the current election impact or future impact, is your approach to corporate and foundation funders different from your approach to individual donors? everyone's thinking.
I was gonna say, I can jump in. Our approach has not changed, how we're, building relationships with corporations and foundations versus individuals. Again, I think when we think about the fundamentals of fundraising, if you're truly building authentic relationships, then it's acknowledging what's happening in the world. It's listening. I love Jennifer's listening deeply to pay attention to the nuance that people are bringing to the conversation for why they're interested in investing with your organization or why maybe they need some more persuading to do so. So if we're being authentic and building our relationships, then we just have to acknowledge what's happening this year. This year, there's an election. We're in a deeply divided country right now. As Anna mentioned, half the country is going to be upset no matter what happens. And so we can acknowledge that and still move our conversations along and try to build productive relationships. And the work we do, I love the heebie-weebie too. Like, we are still going to be here. We are still going to need to be doing this work to get innocent people out of prison, regardless of who is elected at the state, local, national level. And so our need for support does not change.
Thank you, Marissa. A question that I do think is important as we think about corporate and foundations, and I know I'm sitting in our foundation, but sometimes I also think about our own boards. Are any of you having these conversations with your boards or your trustees about, the election and how it might impact this current moment, year end, or even some of those 2025 thoughts, depending on who actually is elected? But by the way, quick side note, I know we're talking about the presidential election, but there's a lot of elections and a lot of politics going on. And I don't want us to lose sight of a lot of those moments happening down ballot as well. But any discussions with boards or leadership at your organizations?
So I'll quickly say that we talk about it constantly with our board and, both in person at meetings and sending memos and thought pieces. And, given what we do and being a political organization, our board members are by default, we assume they're interested in this, and they are. So that may not be that instructive for others who don't necessarily have the political bent, but it's something that we're in conversation with all the time, about all the time.
Excellent. 3 minutes. I'm going to give you one more question and then maybe we wrap up. This is a question about any opinions about in-person events around the election date. This particular person has an event planned for the week after where we will have a mission call moment and we will be selling tables and tickets these 2 months leading into it. Any of you have any fundraising in-person events happening near November? I see Anna nodding. Yes.
We do. We actually have an event before the election, like 2 weeks before, on October 24th, and then another one on November 14th. So we will have both the pre and post. And there's a lot of, I think, need to bring people together before and after to highlight kind of what's at stake with the election and then be able to respond to what happened. And so I think it is an opportunity. I realize that there is, fatigue, but it's fatigue from all of the bombardment, as we've been talking about. It's not authentic connection. And I think people right now are really craving community. There's very few places where they're finding it. And an event is an opportunity to build community, give people the opportunity to see others who care deeply about your issue. And I think it's a really effective strategy, depending on kind of how you're doing it. This sounds like a fundraising event where you're actually, raising money, selling tables. And I would just, really work with your donor community to make it, there's a value add for them to be part of it.
Anna, thank you. It's 1:29. Want to get everybody out of here on time. Thank you to Anna, Jennifer, Marissa, and Shabana for this really robust conversation. I want to thank our audience and our attendees for these really great questions. I can see there are more we didn't get to, but I'd encourage you to follow all of these ladies on LinkedIn, maybe have some of your own discussions. And Michelle also noted that the upcoming events for NYU's Heyman program and Apereo the next one is October 24th. So thank you all so much. Best wishes in this election season and hope to see you all again soon.